Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar organized by JetBrains. I'm Paul Everitt, Python developer advocate. I'll be your host. Today's topic is one to just please my little nerd heart. We're going to talk about Django Software Foundation, not Django the software, but Django the organization that has served as steward for the software and the community for a decade and a half. Who better to join us for an interview than Chaim Kirby, president of the DSF? Welcome, Chaim.
Hi, Paul. Thanks for having me, and thanks to JetBrains for having me.
I said I was going to come up with something to throw you off base. Why don't I do that right now?
Sure.
You say you're a singer? You get on stage like
I
in
do,
a band or something?
There's
What's
a guitar behind me over here. There's a guitar here that I'm working on building. I got 7 in the other room. Yeah.
All right. You in a band?
A small one. We're sort of practicing right now, but yeah.
What's the name of the band?
So it's called Unkempt, but the neighborhood I live in is called Kempt Mill, so we're Unkempt.
All right.
Yeah.
All right, great. Hey, you're East Coast like me, right?
I am born and bred in Boston, live in Maryland now.
All right. All right, cool. You gave a talk at, I guess, last year's Django Con. We were talking about it backstage, I guess. That was Porto, right?
Yep, Django Con Europe in Porto, Portugal.
Yeah. You're a really good speaker, and you also did a podcast with our friends, Will Vinson, Carlton Gibson. I guess that was in March-ish or something like that. I'll use the same lead-in that they used. Briefly, give us the pitch. What is the DSF?
So the DSF, the Django Software Foundation, is the rights holder for Django, the code, as well as the steward of the community.
That is a great way to put it. You have a couple of slides in your DjangoCon Europe that kind of talk about that. You know, we're here to protect. So you got a slide about things like that. So we'll get into this. This is going to be a kind of different webinar for us. It's going to be interview style rather than presentation. So let me get some slides up real quick where we'll do some housekeeping and then we will jump right into it. We'd like to make this webinar as conversational as possible. This is a conversation, so it's going to be really conversational, but live as possible as well. So should you have any questions or problems during the webinar, I'm looking over here. You'll see me looking over there sometime. I'm not checking Slack. I'm here to talk with all of you, and we'll collect questions up and bring them back up to Chaim as we go along. Using the chat in YouTube, and we're in Twitch. Wonder if we have anybody in Twitch. Sometimes we do. So just go ahead and ask your questions and we will answer them. Usually the most common question, I joke about this. I've done like 1 trillion of these webinars and I make the joke every time and then it happens every time. Yes, this is being recorded. One of you will say 3 minutes from now, hey, is this recorded? It's YouTube. It's being recorded. It's available basically immediately. But we will also do a blog post and a tweet or whatever they're called now, announcing the recording afterwards. With that in mind, we will go ahead and get back out and proceed with the interview. Let me see. We have a bunch of hellos already. Hi, everybody.
Hello. Thanks for coming.
Let's see. Who is from the most interesting place? So everyone in chat right now, say where you're currently sitting, and we'll give a pseudo award for coolest location in the audience. And kudos to you for making a good joke. Hey, is this being recorded? Yes, this is being recorded. In fact, I will go ahead and do that thing to pop that up. That's pretty funny. Okay. All right. And I need to get that one to go away. Hi. All right, cool. Let's go ahead and proceed with the interview. Tell us the story of you.
The story of me. Sure. So I am a born and bred engineer. My dad was a software engineer. I have a undergrad and master's in computer science. And I started right in healthcare space, working at a Children's Hospital Boston informatics program. But at the same time, I said, you know what? It was the early 2000s and law and tech law was a very interesting thing. So why don't I go to law school? So I did go to law school as well. I am a retired member of the Massachusetts Bar. Never practiced. Yeah, never practiced because the law practice sort of just kicked the bucket when I graduated. It was 2008. It was not a great time to graduate as a lawyer, but I had a good gig going as an engineer, and I love being an engineer. So I continued doing that. The early 2010s, I think 2011, I started in on Python and Django, and simply loved it, and have been using them every day since then. Started writing some of my own Django code, writing some of my own packages, and then I was like, hey, this is a really cool thing. Started going to conferences, did conferences, met Carlton, became really close with Carlton. And after a while, I was like, hey, I like doing this. I like this community. Maybe I should try giving back. Ran for the board in 2019 for the 2020 board, 2020 for the 2021 board. Was elected, and then the board nominated me internally as secretary, and then elected again as VP, and finally now as president. And in my day-to-day job, I'm a head of engineering at a very small startup called Budgie Health, and we use Django every day.
All right. It's interesting. Your legal background preceded your software background. Van Lindbergh, who was president of the Python Software Foundation forever and ever, also in law in Salt Lake City. The point that you're trained as an attorney is an interesting one. When people vote for the PSF election or any of these foundation elections, people choose people who can actually run an organization, because this is not a coding job. This is a sustainability job. We have some really interesting things popping up in chat. We have Dallas, Austria, 2 North Carolinas, Honduras, Brazil, London, Jordan,
phenomenal,
Serbia, Denver, Tajikistan, Uganda. How about that? Poland, Hong Kong, Uzbekistan. All right.
Django is truly international. Thanks.
Indeed. We have a question that's a Django question, and I'll just bring it up
Sure.
real quick, just as an exemplar of what we're not going to be talking about. So this is not going to be too much a conversation about Django, the software and technology. If we have time at the end, Asim, we will try and get back to that. Okay, I'll go ahead and proceed, and then we'll come back and catch up on some of these. Give us a short history of Django and its foundation.
Sure. So if I get these numbers correct, the first release of Django was July 2005. And the reason that's sort of top of mind is I think it would be great for us to have a 20th birthday party in 2025, but we'll figure that out when it comes. The DSF was founded fairly shortly after then in 2008, I believe. And my understanding, this is sort of from the history books for me, is that there was understanding that this was a community project and that a foundation is a good way to run a community project. And I think, being president of the foundation at this point, it indeed is. At this point, the DSF has had 5 presidents, myself included. Trying to figure it out, I think there's been 14 or 15 distinct boards. There were a couple that overlapped a few years. And we're still going strong. Had a board meeting just last week. We have one every month. And going strong, growing, continuing, and really trying to really inspect what our purpose is and how we go about doing things, and really try to keep it a thriving and viable thing. Django, I don't really have a concern that it'll be a thriving and viable thing, but the software is nothing without the community.
Indeed.
And so, we need to be there to support that.
And because it is a success and it's mature, that means there are stakes.
Absolutely.
And those stakes have to be defended, if nothing else. Just as a historical note, around that exact same time, the Python Software Foundation was created, the Plone Foundation was created, and you don't see too many of those these days. It's weird that there were 3 big Python foundations within a couple of years,
right?
But that doesn't seem to be much of a thing anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked to a few people sort of in the space, and there's a lot going on, right? First of all, you have to have the people that are interested in doing it. There's legal requirements for setting up a foundation. You gotta, report taxes every year, stuff like that, which is not the simplest thing. And You have to have, I think, a critical mass for it to be meaningful. I know in some spaces there are huge tools that really are one person, right? Well,
Sure.
could they use a foundation? Maybe, right? They're again, if you're thinking about the community, but they're sort of running their own thing, and they are truly the benevolent dictator for life. Maybe not.
Yeah, I was also involved in Pyramid, and we talked with the FSF, Software Freedom Law Center, Software Conservancy people, Bradley Kuhn and them, about having a nonprofit, I don't know, like 2012, 2014 or something like that. 501c3 status in the U.S. is hard.
Yep.
And so you see things like the Pallets folks, Flask, I believe, decided to become a kind of an entity within the PSF. The PSF, I think, is trying to have, what's the legal term for that? Not a conservancy.
Yeah, no. So the PSF, they have like financial. I have it written down somewhere.
It's like
I haven't
steward or something.
Yeah, sponsories.
Sponsory.
Where I think the PSF sort of offers, after approval and things like that. And I don't want to speak for the PSF, but as I understand it, back office support. We'll deal with the money flows. We'll deal with the taxes.
We'll file the corporate
targeted.
papers with
right,
the
exactly. Yeah. Which is honestly a huge help for a lot of places and things. I think we are both at sort of a scale and a time period that we're sort of out of that scope.
Sure.
But yeah, if you can avail yourself of that and get some of that off your plate. Certainly.
I talked to Numb Focus at PyCon, and they've got a kind of well-oiled machine, but maybe they decide to hand some of that over. So I've got a question on this that will be a good segue to the next topic. What is a foundation? What do foundations do? So what is and isn't the DSF?
Absolutely. So there are a bunch of different types of foundations. So the DSF is a 501c3. I always get those backwards, but I think that's the right way. Nonprofit. And we have, our purpose is the promotion, the maintenance, and the furtherance of Django as a piece of software. So we do fundraising to support Django, and that fundraising is targeted primarily in two ways. So one is for maintaining Django. Now, specifically not for Django development. There are interesting tax and nonprofit implications for us paying people to actually write code for Django explicitly, but we do have fellows. We have two fellows, Marius and Natalia. They are sort of the day-to-day handlers of ticket triage, of code outreach, maintenance, things like that. They also sort of maintain our website, things of that nature. We have Catherine, who is our board assistant, who does the day-to-day work for the board. We could talk about sort of that separately and sort of how foundations grow, but without Catherine, we would be completely lost. She's doing our sort of daily communication, keeping up with sponsorees, things of that nature. What is the foundation not? We do not direct or instruct or control the direction that Django grows. We do have the steering council that are the final arbiters of sort of big ideas in Django and the direction for Django. The steering council falls under the umbrella of the DSF. So since the DSF holds the copyright, in theory, there's sort of a final say there, but that's never had to come up, and I don't expect it ever will. But really explicitly, the foundation and the code are tightly entwined, but two different things.
In fact, on that about the code, we have a question.
Excellent. What if someone wants to be a contributor to Django? And there was a question about, do we do hiring? So we are open to contributions. We on the djangoproject.com website has a link to the code. It also has a link to our issue tracker. What does it take to contribute? Find an issue, work on it. We have the Django forum, which is an excellent place for asking questions on how to contribute, as well as the official Django Discord, another excellent place to ask questions. But yeah, like any open source project, if you want to contribute, please do. On the code side, really explicitly, there are other ways to contribute potentially to the foundation or sort of the greater community side. But yeah, if you write code, if you're interested in contributing code, please do come take a look at the code and the issue tracker and dive in.
When you were describing the two kind of higher positions you have, for those familiar with the PSF, that sounds a little bit like Lucas Longa, developer in residence, who does some of the pull request merging and janitorial work to keep the code moving. And then Deb Richardson, who kind of runs like executive director, running the operation of the foundation and things like that.
Exactly. Yeah. And we don't really have a Deb equivalent. We've talked about like executive directors kind of thing, sort of the day-to-day running and the board being more oversight. Catherine, like I said, runs our day-to-day, but more at the direction of the board versus.
Okay. Got it. Okay. That makes sense. Here's a question, probably not for you. I'll take it, because I was around at the time. So when Django was created, it killed my thing. So I remember very specifically about this. It started for solving the problem of newspaper systems. Interestingly, my thing, Zope, was created by newspapers. And I think that at the time you could kind of say it was Python's response to Ruby on Rails. Very strongly relational database oriented, ORM that was, instead of active record, was based on a different pattern and stuff like that. So at that time, kind of coming out of the first .com bubble, there was just this rush to get commerce onto the web and stuff like that. And so Django was designed for, I guess, companies that had like in-house staff creating content, putting it out the door, custom applications and things like that, heavily web oriented. Okay, let's go into the next thing we have, and then we'll take some more questions. We talked about what is and isn't the DSF. And this, from my perspective, a foundation is kind of a conservancy of assets.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
But what assets are there? People just think, I put the code under a license. What more is there to it?
Sure. So ultimately, yes, code falls under a license, but there is a license, the ultimate license holder. So the DSF is the owner of the Django codebase, which is licensed out by our licensing. Additionally, we have the trademark, the Django trademark, as well as some of our images, copyright on the code. I guess I said that. And trademark gets into a really interesting place that I could go on forever, talk about a lawyer. Trademark is an interesting bit of intellectual property that sort of nobody understands the purpose of it. But yeah, the trademark ultimately we control. So at the end of the day, and a few things, right? The logo, we have a single, as I understand it, we have a single license for the font that the Django logo is in. So very little things like that. If you're interested more about the trademark, you can go to the website, the Django project website. It's sort of hidden, but I think if you click on like the Django logo in the bottom, it brings you to how I can use this trademark and logo. And we have sort of the definitions of what the expectations are. At the end of the day, maintaining, which means policing our trademark, is one of the biggest roles that the board has to do outside of sort of money and grants.
The only thing worse than the misery of defending the trademark is not defending the trademark.
Yeah. If anybody's interested in the why do you have to defend trademarks, we can have that conversation a separate time. But it's actually a very interesting topic, but out of scope, I think.
It is a different webinar. Let's just say that there are a lot of jurisdictions in the world.
Yes, there are. With
lots of rules and lots of rules that changes. It sounds a little bit like time zones.
Time zones are worse. Yeah, but yeah, I mean, if anybody has ever listened to Russell's talk on time and time zones,
yeah.
Time zones are worse.
But if you want to know why a foundation needs to exist and why it needs money for non-development things, this is an example of it. You got to pay a specialist who is current in all these jurisdictions as like an agency or something to defend trademarks as well as other things like that. All right, let's see. Okay, so we got a bunch of questions that are more about Django development. I'll save those for then if we have time. Here's one that I'll bring up real quick. Do you want to take that one?
Oh my goodness. It's from the guitarist Django Reinhardt, but that's about the extent of my knowledge.
That is the complete totality of the answers.
Right. Yeah. Somebody really likes Django Reinhardt. I should ask Jacob the next board meeting.
We will have you as outro music to some
Ooh.
Django riff.
Oh yeah, no, I can't.
I think
I wish.
Will and Carlton use a Django song
They do. Yep.
as the intro music.
Yep.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about governance.
Sure.
Django's the DSF has a board. It also has kind of the equivalent of Python when Guido stepped down and they formed. So you've got the equivalent of that.
Yep.
Talk to me about election processes.
Sure. So let's talk about the board. The election processes are fairly similar. But so for the DSF board, we have elections once a year, towards the end of the year. Usually elections happen in November. 7-member board. And until recently, and in fact, until this most recent election, everyone was elected to 1-year terms. The previous board, which I was on, decided that that wasn't the best. A bunch of us came on right before COVID, and it takes a while to understand how to run a board, how to run a foundation, things like that. And COVID was burning a lot of people out. Don't really want to get onto a whole COVID talk, but we got into this realm of saying, what if this burned everybody out and everybody disappeared? There was like the people who were already on the board did a lot of knowledge transfer. It was important. So we changed the model to staggered 2-year terms. So this most recent election, 4 members of the board were elected to a 2-year term. 3 members were elected to a 1-year term. So this election will be for 3 members, and that'll set up our staggered terms. Anybody can be nominated for the DSF board. You don't have to be an individual member of the Django Software Foundation. Honestly, you never even have to touch Django ever. Probably not going to get elected, but you can nominate yourself. Anyone can be nominated. Those nominations go to a vote to the membership, which is about 300 some odd people. And it was a top 7 election most recently. And then for the future, it'll be the other ones. And board positions, so president, vice president, secretary, and treasurer, are then selected among the board themselves. We install in December at the December board meeting, and then we immediately select officer positions, and then we go.
Are you happy with I'll focus this question specifically on the system of elections itself, and then I'll ask a follow-on question.
Sure. Am I happy with it? Yes, we've had a lot of difficulty over the years with election and voting software and finding the right tool for what we need. We've got one that we're fairly happy with right now. We used to use a free system that did concordant voting, which we can get into it, but basically everyone is head to head and then it picks the top winner. We moved away from that because they realized that their voting invite system was acting as an open email relay. And in order to use it, you had to actually send out an email prior for everybody to validate that they would be an elector and stuff. And it sort of became a whole extra process. So we're using a new tool right now, which the name is escaping me right now, that we're fairly happy with. The UX was a little difficult for the most recent election, but it's working for us. So
the
yeah,
DSF
I think
uses Helios.
Yeah, there was a reason we didn't, and I forget what that was. So the DSF secretary runs elections. To some degree, hopefully we have one that we're happy with and we use it because we don't want to be reevaluating our tooling every year. But so the process, yes, the election itself, always having more members, individual members, which is something we talk about separately, and more people voting. At the end of the day, I don't know how many Django developers there are in the world. So somewhere between 100,000 and 1 million is my guess. And we can talk about how I got to that. At the end of the day, the board was elected by about 150 of those. So, yeah.
First, on the software itself, every time there's an election, Python has some real election nerds.
Oh, yeah. I know a bunch of election nerds. It's a fun time. But yeah, it's a great time to think about.
They want a system that is cryptographically secure to the heat death of the sun.
Yep. Yeah.
And
I have a good friend.
Maybe might be a little bit of an overshoot. But as far as the skill set that you're getting in, the vitality that you're getting in, the rate of turnover and stuff like that. My guess is there's a little bit of call to action to people to get off the couch and get involved, right?
Yeah. So there's both, and there are so many places of that, like talking about at the board level, at the member level, at the contributor level, at the community level, all these sort of things. The most recent election to the board was amazing. I think we had about 40 nominees because we'd been talking it up and we were changing a lot of process, and several people were stepping down. And the skill levels and the abilities were just high through the roof. It was amazing. But then you get down to but there's also questions of who's running for the board. Generally, it's people who are individual members of the DSF. And when I say individual members, let's be specific. The DSF has two different types of memberships: corporate memberships and individual memberships. Corporate memberships are corporate sponsors. They sponsor us at a particular level. We approve it. They become a corporate sponsor, a corporate member. Individual members are members who've been nominated to the foundation and then approved by the board. They are people who have given back to Django in some way. Historically, it was basically you wrote more than a line of code type of deal. You contribute back in code. As it's grown, as contributing just code becomes more difficult, that's expanded. You give talks. You write third-party apps. You're present and active in the community in a way that sort of the community knows you. It is perfectly valid. And those... Mm-hmm. The reason for being an individual member is A, recognition, and B, the ability to vote on the board, vote about the steering committee, things of that nature. And so I can't announce it yet, but the board is trying to make some changes and rethink how we think about membership. So right. Hopefully that might be announced. I might be announcing that at DjangoCon US in October. We'll see.
Stay tuned.
Yeah, stay tuned. But we want, in a nutshell, our goal is to have the membership be more able to recognize that people use Django and use it a lot and potentially use it for their entire career, and not just are not flybys, and maybe some way to recognize that or some level in between. And then we have questions sort of code contribution and contribution back to the community. So make a proposal to give a talk at a conference, but then code. That question came up earlier. There are several initiatives to try to make it easier to contribute code. We recognized, it has been recognized, I say we, I was maybe part of the discussions, but other people have taken it on much more, that it got hard, right? Django is mature. It is hard to add a huge feature because you have to understand a lot of Django and understand how it works. But small features, small bits may be easier. And so documentation, an excellent one. Yeah, exactly. Documentation is a huge deal. So Django Spaces is sort of getting off the ground, and it's sort of a mentorship project for helping people level into contributing code back on a more ongoing basis. The Django newsletter, for anybody who gets it, has a new section. It's a wonderful section that Sarah Boyce decided, yay, this would be a good idea, where we call out new contributors every week when the newsletter comes out, every week, every month. When the newsletter comes out, the new contributors are recognized, which I think is wonderful and amazing. And the fact that we see at least one every time speaks volumes.
Sure. And if I could give a little commentary on it, when I see the bios for people running for positions and stuff, I'm really attracted to people who run meetups.
Yep. Yeah.
They're like the middle management of open source, and they should be on a career track to be on the board.
Yeah. So I agree. Sort of the community organizer structure. Yes, and they should come in eyes wide open, because the inertia of the foundation is very different than setting up a meetup. Hugely valuable skill set, and if you're not worried about burning yourself out, or you're willing to give it your all, 100%, please do.
Well, there's a related to helping run a conference.
Yep.
Maybe you ran the tutorial track. Maybe you helped on the talk papers. Maybe you helped on the money for securing the deposit for a venue or stuff like that.
Yep.
Those are the non-sexy things in open source. And foundations deal with, frankly, janitorial work.
Absolutely. Yeah. Everything that happens in the back end that nobody really sees. and not just the foundation, to the steering committee, to Marius, to
Yeah.
Natalia, everybody, like it's all the stuff that keeps things moving and keeps this code in this community vibrant and vital, and not just like, yeah, it'll be good for another couple of years and then we'll move on to something new.
Sure. You just mentioned steering committee. I had meant to ask you a little bit about it, and there was a question that kind of touched on it.
Yep.
Explain the separation of church and state between foundation and the software, and who is the equivalent of the foundation, but on the software side.
Sure. So the steering committee is a currently 4-member committee, final arbiter of the code, as features, as what's included and what's not. There are some discussions on sort of the structure and the look of that ongoing among the membership, and because we always want to improve and understand and do better. But effectively, the steering committee a couple of years ago replaced what had been the core committee, basically the 10 or 15 legacy contributors to Django, who were sort of the unofficial / official, we are the arbiters of Django. They in turn had replaced the benevolent dictators, and so it's a growth in who can become available. I think again it's a recognition of, just because people have been able to give, doesn't mean new people shouldn't be able to give back and raise that bar. It's still a fairly high bar. That's one thing that's being examined right now, is at what level should that bar be to somebody be elected to help understand and guide Django as a code base. But yeah, so they cover the code. The DSF takes care of everything else so that the code can live and thrive.
Well said. I mentioned this on a podcast with Brian Ocken recently. We always think of the old heroes, and Django certainly has its founders and old heroes and stuff like that. But it's time to hand things over to the new heroes. And if you are someone out there and you want to get involved, you have a passion, you have a vision, do it.
Yes.
The old heroes want to help you get in place. They want to make you successful.
Yeah, for sure. There's something attractive for sure to be like, oh, I'm going to create my own new and shiny thing. And yeah, it's attractive and there's practice and you learn from that. But there's also something really beautiful in taking something that's been around for, almost 20 years and still growing and still being used and giving back to that. Just from like, if nothing else, people who know how to code in COBOL get paid a whole lot of money, right? Like if you know something that's 50 years old, you have a good story to tell.
Well said. Well said. I'm going to bring a question up that we are going to cover 2 questions from now, but I'll go ahead and see them on the screen. We're going to talk about funding targets.
Yeah.
And we can talk about the managerial level as well. I'll bring up a point from Steve that's related to what we just discussed. The foundation keeps its hands off of roadmap. Is that right?
Yeah. So along with the sort of overhaul from the core contributor core committee to the steering council, there was an overhaul of the definition of our roadmap, and the fellows are deeply involved in that. But yeah, so it falls to them. We do have a public roadmap. You can look at that. What's on individual release versions, that comes up as part of, the work of the fellows and the work of the steering council and things of that nature. But we have a regular cadence release. You can go look for it. I don't remember it off the top of my head. I do know there's 3 minor releases for every major version. The X.2 version is the long-term release. And importantly, new steering committees, I always get the term wrong, sorry, new steering councils are elected for every new major version.
How about release manager?
So release manager, it is defined, and we could have different release managers. Right now, the release managers are the fellows, because that's primarily easiest, but it doesn't have to be.
And just as a spoiler, 5.0 is in sight, right?
5.0 is in sight. Yes, that's right.
All right, let's go on to the next topic, financial and administrative health.
Sure. Yeah.
Both
Good one.
financial and administrative, money and people. We'll start with the financial part. How's the DSF doing financially?
Yeah. Fine. I guess is an answer. We have money in the bank. Not to say people should stop giving, because please don't. But we are perfectly fine. We have the ability to pay our fellows. We have the ability to pay Catherine. We have the ability to give grants for conferences and things of that nature. And that is where our money is meant to go. The reason I say is meant to go, everybody has interesting ideas what we could do with more money along, promotion or this or that, the other thing. There's a lot of ideas. An executive director, to raise more money, a fundraiser. You got to pay a fundraiser to raise money. So there's lots of ongoing questions about, do we want to raise more money? Can we raise more money? What would it take to raise more money? If we do, what is the purpose of raising more money? You don't just raise money to have money, especially in a nonprofit space. And the reason they're ongoing conversations is, at the end of the day, except for Catherine, Marius, and Natalia, our fellows, everyone does this as volunteer work. So it's absolutely a question of how much time and effort we can put behind it, on the board, on the steering council, on anything that is sort of helping out. And it's a lot. It's big. I think the inflation hit us. It's going to be interesting where our numbers are this year. And I want a huge shout out to JetBrains. JetBrains and the PyCharm fundraiser is a huge amount of our coffers, and they're hugely helpful. So thank you to JetBrains. But yeah, I think where it stands is we could keep moving along sort of at this pace, and that's fine. I don't know if there's a, I don't want to use the R word, but if there's a recession, right, our costs go up, but sponsorship goes down, right? Really interesting difficulties there. So who knows? But at the moment, we are just fine.
But at the same time, that means if someone has a big vision and wants to get involved and wants to go beat the bushes to get sponsorship money, at PyCon US each year, the PSF has a lunch and they present the numbers in broken down by categories and stuff like that, and do year over year over year analysis and things like that. And it's come a long way.
Yes. Yeah. So, a couple of things in that. We have heard that sort of more transparency in our numbers, people are interested in, and that's something we can work on, right? Sure. Frankly, there's something we can work on. Though, since we're a nonprofit, our tax filings are public, so you can go look at them on ProPublica and stuff if you really want to. The PSF's an interesting counterpoint. The PSF is like an order of magnitude and then times 2 our budget, I think, in scale. So like their money certainly goes a lot more places. The bulk of ours goes to our fellows, but yeah, it's a conversation we had. But yeah, if somebody has a big idea, one idea that we need to get done, again, it's more time, but I think is certainly lacking at the DSF is we don't have the one pager. Here's what the DSF does. Here's what Django does. Here's why you as a company should give money, because, you're built on that little XKCD comic of like the tiny little block, right?
The one guy.
Right. Exactly. Because I think a lot of developers who use Django, a lot of project managers, companies, whatever, everybody's kind of aware that it's an open source tool, that there is a foundation, that there is sponsorship money, but it's that, how do I tell my boss? How do I convince them? And like, you don't necessarily have to have that conversation. If we can give you a PDF and say, here, hand this to your boss.
Sure.
That might be better. We got to find the time to do that.
Indeed. And it's not fair to pile that on the old heroes.
Correct.
Someone out there that's got a passion, that sees a vision, can get involved, do these things, and probably they won't hit the scale of the PSF fundraising. But if all you did was 1/10 the PSF fundraising, there's a lot of room.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny, we just had a conversation about this at the board meeting last week. The sort of ultra big sponsorships, corporate sponsorships, those are out of scope right now. Completely honestly, those take a fundraiser person. Those are like long-term coordination of like over a year and like it's building relationships. We're not looking for that, right? Like
Sure.
if I'll just say it outright. If you're at a medium-sized company, whatever, your manager may well be able to authorize, $100 donation. That's not at corporate sponsorship levels, but we do take any donations. Corporate sponsorship levels basically start at $1,000. But if your company is running on Django and you didn't have to spend 10 years building a full web framework and you're just using one, your company may well be able to spend $1,000 in thanks.
And in return, you'll get out the guitar and record a custom ringtone for it.
Sure. I don't know about that, but we do have a few things. I think, they're at different levels, you get different things, but there's, a tweet or an X or whatever the heck they're being called these days, if you really want one. But yeah.
A little plug for us. Thank you for mentioning our work over the years for the fundraiser. I promised the team I would never mention the really exciting Django thing they showed me yesterday that they're working on. So no talk about what might come in PyCharm. No talk about that at all.
Though I do know the survey's coming.
Mentioned earlier that reminds me that we hired a developer advocate that will be joining us in a couple of months to focus on Django and Django community, and we are really happy about that.
Yes.
Okay.
And I know who it is, and
awesome. You know who it is.
That's
yes.
Awesome. Yeah.
We'll have to. Okay. This is a question more about the software itself. It's not exactly the same as some of the other questions I have to skip that are more detailed. We can at least try and slot this.
Sure.
Where would you give either elevator pitch about Django itself, or where would you stack it up against the modern Python web development market?
Sure. So that's a good one. I am obviously biased. I love Django. I see no reason to move. Not to say that sometimes there aren't a reason to use other tools. But how do I see it in the future? I don't think we can predict the future, but I think in this case, past performance does have some predictive value. Django is robust. It's been around for a while. We've knocked down a lot of the, problems, shall we say. And so I think as a first pass of this is good and robust and it'll work for you, that's great. That you don't have to build a lot of things. And I don't want this to sound, I am not disparaging other frameworks. Different frameworks make different decisions. And to some degree, it's which trade-offs you want to make. I like Django. I think in Django. I've used a lot of frameworks in various languages at this point. And the way Django runs sort of speaks to my brain. And so it works for me.
Indeed.
Hopefully it works for you. But if not, I'm not going to tell you don't use another tool. There's lots of good tools. For the future, we continue to work on async. I'm not going to try. I'm involved, but not much on sort of that development side. So I don't want to misspeak, but async is a big deal. Channels is a big deal. And so that is something that is continue to be worked on, obviously. And we see more every release, but I think our goal and the goal of everybody in Django is to keep it a thriving and relevant framework within the decisions that were made for Django.
All right, let's get on to give me a quick answer on this one so I can get to the next question.
Does Django offer official YT channels? No. Again, we're all volunteers. We have no time to make a YT channel.
I think Django is pretty well covered in YouTube.
Yeah.
For learning material and stuff like that, and podcasts and books and things like that. That's what you get when you get a mature ecosystem. So
and a Will Vincent.
If you want to know how it stacks up, it's mature and has things like this. That's the answer. Okay, on to our friend Jay Miller.
Oh, hey Jay. Oh my goodness. Wonderful question. And that again goes to and I love how you phrased it. How's the Django community trying to bring in new people? So I know I mentioned Django Spaces, which is an effort to bring in new developers. Django Girls, we can't go any chat without mentioning Django Girls, one day tutorials, bringing new people in. They do amazing work. I said in my talk in Porto, and I'll say it again now, one of the pillars of the DSF is promotion of Django, and I think that's where we fall flat a little. I think that's probably because, again, it's a whole volunteer work. To say, what are we doing to bring more people in? Not enough as a foundation, perhaps. I think the community is doing plenty. But you're asking volunteers. We're asking volunteers to do a lot of outreach, a lot of expansion. We are doing some efforts at the board level to examine our bylaws to think about how people can participate sort of in the greater community in a more sort of directed fashion. And so I guess look for this announcement or chat about this at DjangoCon US. But yeah, I think outreach, for lack of a better term, is a place where we are lacking, and how to do that and how to find the time to do that is a very large open question.
It is. Back when I was involved with the Plone Foundation, our mission was protect and promote Plone.
Right.
And the promote part got the leftovers in the budget. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
We'll do a couple quick shout outs, starting with a shout out. So Corey Schaefer forever. Way to go, Corey.
Thanks, Corey.
And a follow up from Jay. Everybody get to a Django conference near you this year.
Yep, I'll be there.
Yep. And then we'll do this one real quick. Do you have any interactions with like the Instagram folks?
Yeah. So this always comes up, like the huge companies. Do we have interactions? No. Are there some relations?
We is the DSF.
The DSF, right? Yeah. Not directly. I'm not going to name and or shame any individual sponsors, though we do highlight all of our sponsors on the website. So if you could go, you can go see who the
love all our
sponsors are.
children equally.
Right, exactly. But that's sort of at the level where I was talking about, where that is, you know, you need to, $1,000 is too small for them, so they don't. But like significantly more, you have to maintain relationships and like build relationships, and just the cycles for that are, you know, not currently existent.
Sure. Before getting to the last question, to get us to the last topic to discover, we have a volunteer who wants to run for the DSF board. I'm joking in saying this is the equivalent of patches accepted. If you want the DSF to do more promotion, get involved. That you are exactly right, except they includes you.
Yeah.
They is us. So make it happen.
Yeah, we will certainly consider sort of putting our name, our imprimatur on anything. Yeah. But when those questions come and say, please do more work, that's where, I mean, the idea is wonderful, but.
Yeah. But on your point, I think you're exactly right. Having kind of a face of the DSF who shared the information specific to the DSF could have an effect of generating more workers than it consumed.
Yep.
So if someone out there was willing to take that role, they could lead a big influx of help.
Yeah, for sure. And plenty of people. I mean, we have Mastodon presence, we have Twitter presence, we have presence in a lot of places. And those are a lot of people who say, I want to do this. Can I use the Django name? And there are a lot of things about that, and where you put it and say, you know, this is recognized by, we could talk about that separately. But if you wanted to undertake that and either read the board minutes or read the release notes and make a quick Django video, I mean, doesn't even have to come from the Django name. Go ahead and do that. But if we come to some agreement, then maybe it does come from the Django name, and you just take it on for sure.
Sure. There's someone sitting out there that can take this, run with it, and make a huge positive impact. You don't have to be living in Silicon Valley. You can be anywhere. What you need is joy and purpose and a little bit of fun on camera, maybe.
I actually do want to note specifically, neither the newsletter nor the podcast fall under the DSF.
Sure. Yeah.
Those are both, you know, independent, and we, you know, recognize.
But they're telling the story of Django. Somebody needs to tell the story of the DSF.
Interesting. Yeah.
Okay. Last one from the Epic Dev.
Yep.
And this will lead into a wrap up about money and getting into futures.
Yeah. So not exact numbers, because I don't have exact numbers in my back pocket, but more than $200,000, less than $300,000 a year.
Okay. Good specific answer. We are going to begin our way out of this one. So if any of you have any follow-up questions, now's a good time to ask them. We'll take them after we do this next segment. Futures. And by this, I don't really mean Django futures and async and stuff like that. The next generation of heroes, and what you talked about this a little bit in your DjangoCon Europe talk.
Yeah. I love Django, fairly obviously. I enjoy being here. I see no reason. I said, I think in my talk that, no matter who else is around, I'll turn the lights off at the end. But hopefully there isn't an end. That does require people giving their time, giving their effort, giving their interest, giving their money, right? All these things are sort of fungible in different ways. But we need a little bit of all of it. It is a fun community. I think more than anything, if anybody hasn't been to a Django Con or a Django meetup, try to find the time to go to one. They're pretty amazing. They're small enough scale that you can sort of meet everybody.
Human-sized.
Yeah, exactly. Definitely human sized. Mostly, they're on the sort of 500 to 600 people, generally speaking. Come say hi to me. I'm happy to say hi to anyone, and it would be a lot of fun. But I think the software is amazing. And I love working in the software. We love working in the software. Like I said, I sort of dream in Django. And it's a cliche, and we say it about Python, but Django too. It is about the people. I can say we have a code of conduct committee. Everyone does. The number of reports they have to deal with are minuscule, and I think that speaks to the community volumes. Right? It's a great community of welcoming to new people, of people who've been around, giving back, of people leaving and doing something else and coming back. And I just hope that keeps going. I think we got really good indication. There was huge questions coming out of COVID and remote conferences and things. Is anybody going to come to a conference? And the returns seem to say yes, and people get a lot out of it and get a lot out of being part of the community.
Sure. Jay had a couple of points that were good about that. I'll put this one up. And it kind of reminds me of, I guess Jay's boss, but my Python hero, Brett Cannon's famous saying, "Come for the language, stay for the community." If you can't make it to one of the big Django conferences, go to a Django Girls meetup or something like that. Probably closer, in your local language, and human-sized, and just, it becomes a tribe, a group of people who care for you, who value you, find you valuable. It's a good way to get involved.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely like a local meetup, a local Django Girls, like you say. If you're in London, Django Social, and run by John Gould, which is sort of awesome. And the idea there is we're not doing Django stuff. We're Django people, but we're just like hanging out. It's kind of cool. I really like that idea, and hopefully that expands to other places. But this year is a great year. As an example, talking about DjangoCon specifically, there are 4. So there was DjangoCon Europe, DjangoCon US, DjangoCon Africa will be happening, and DjangoCon Australia, I think, just happened. So it's a great year for people.
All right, we'll go ahead and begin a little bit of the wrap up. What's one thing about the Django Software Foundation that you'd like people to think about after this webinar?
Oh my goodness.
What's the walk away?
See that was the curveball. So I think we just spoke about it, and that is between the membership, between the people. I mean, the board this year, about half the board are previous members who left for a while and came back. And it is needing new blood, really involving new blood. And when I say that, I'm not saying, oh, people need to come to us, because I don't think it's that. I think there are plenty of people who want to give back in various ways, and there's sort of this, oh no, I can't. There's these luminaries or these people I've seen on a YouTube stream or something, and it's not that. We embrace everyone, for lack of a better specifier. If you want to give back, if you want to be part of this community, we want you. We want you to give a talk. We want you to listen. We want you to ask a question. I'm going to do something that historically has been okay, and I hope it continues to be okay. If anybody wants to email me directly, it's just my full name at djangoproject.com. I can't say I will reply in a timely manner, but I will reply.
All right. Well said. And what you just did reminds me of when Guido was on stage, and he really wanted a CPython core contributor woman, and offered to be a mentor to make it happen. Yeah. And I believe it was Marietta that took him up on it. And then after that, several others after that, ultimately leading to the PyCon chairperson. So
right. Yeah.
these opportunities, take Chaim up on this and be the next hero.
Please do.
Oh, yeah. It's been a real pleasure talking with you about Django. It's been a pleasure. We had some good questions from the audience getting into what the DSF's about and what needs to be addressed and what are the opportunities. Talking about foundations, which, oh my God, I'm a foundation nerd. We could talk about that in part 2 and part 20.
There you go.
But more specifically, Django's foundation. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Paul. It's been
All
a
right,
pleasure.
we'll come back to the housekeeping slides. The best 2 words of any presentation in conclusion. If you'd like to get more information on PyCharm, please go to our website at jetbrains.com/PyCharm. Keep an eye on what we may or may not be doing in this release cycle. Just saying. If you haven't already, check out the PyCharm blog where you can find up-to-date information about news and releases. We just had a release a few weeks ago, but we'll be starting the EAPs and betas up pretty soon. In addition to educational resources such as this webinar, gotta think about what my next webinar is going to be. Maybe it's going to be about Django. We'll see. We'd love your feedback on this webinar. We actually read it. So if you registered, you'll get a link about a survey. Fill it out. Tell us what you think. Tell us whether we should do more of this interview style. If you want us to do more Django content. Or contact us on Twitter. I'm still going to say Twitter for the rest of my life. Sorry. And we'll email the link to the after webinar survey in just a bit. That's all from us for today. Hi, thank you.
Thank you.
And everyone that joined us today, thank you and hope you have a nice rest of the day.